Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm chatting with the legendary mining investor and commentator, Doug Casey. Doug is by far and away the most popular guest we have on this channel. I think it's because he has a viewpoint that connects with most regular people about how the government is often overreaching into our lives and making our economic situations much worse. Something that I think most people can relate to. Doug's joining us from Argentina, so I start off by asking him about the recent election of President Javier Milei and his thoughts on if Milei is just another face on the political system who is just telling us the things we need to hear, or if Doug believes he can actually make economic change. We also get into this idea of anarcho-capitalism, and Doug describes to us what that means. We also touch on how Doug is positioning his portfolio in terms of what asset classes he thinks are the best ones to be owning to protect yourself for this economic crisis we appear to be heading towards. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Doug, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Steve. I'm joining you from sunny Buenos Aires. Just arrived here yesterday, actually.
So let's start with that. What's happening in Argentina? We recently saw a new president elected, Javier Milei. He's a colorful character. He takes advice from his deceased dog. Believes in I guess we could call him a bit of an anarchist in his views on the economy. Like small government, wants to take on the woke. What's your thoughts? Do you think he can actually create some positive change for Argentina, or do you think he's just another talking head who's going to do what most politicians do?
Well, anybody in politics has, I would say, spiritual and psychological problems. Politicians are all narcissists and opportunists, so I'm not a fan of the breed, regardless. But let me say this about Milei. He, for years, has overtly identified himself as an anarcho-capitalist. What that means is he doesn't believe in the legitimacy of the institution of government, nor do I. I don't think it any longer serves a useful purpose. And we can talk about, people are shocked when they hear, you got to have a government. No, you actually don't. And I can explain why that's not the case. So yes, I think he's a sincere anarcho-capitalist. He's the first person in world history that has run for head of state that has said that he'd ideally like to abolish the head of state. This stuff about getting magic advice from his dogs and all this type of thing, this is basically a fabrication of the press. He loves his dogs. Okay, that's great. We all love our dogs. And he gives his dogs the names of famous libertarian economists. So you know how this works when you've got a dog, you talk to your dog. This is all meaningless. The thing is that he sincerely wants to not just cut back the government, but abolish, pull out by the roots and sow Agent Orange where it grew for many Argentine agencies. And this country used to be one of the most prosperous in the world, on a level with the US, but it's descended for every year for about 100 years. And I think it's hit bottom. And so the Argentine people didn't elect him because he's an anarcho-capitalist. They elected him because they have learned to hate the Peronists, the Kirchneristas that run it now, and are looking for radical change. So the answer to the question, that's more than you wanted to hear, I guess, Steve, but basically, this could be something of world historic importance, and I think he'll succeed.
We're seeing countries around the world. We're either going to the far left or sort of the far right extremes. I wouldn't call this far right. This is different than what's going on. This is a libertarian government, which is different. It's not right or left, and we can talk about why that's true. So I want to follow up on that. when you say anarcho-capitalist, what does that mean to you? What is an anarcho-capitalist? Sell me on the ideology.
Well, the idea from a philosophical point of view is that the government is pure coercion. It's there's no voluntarism about government. It's all about men with guns, that you do what you're told, pay your taxes, follow their regulations, go to their wars, whatever it is, or they will punish you severely. An anarchist is somebody that doesn't believe in an advanced civilized society that government is necessary. Unfortunately, there's a strain of anarchism which is very associated with socialism. Makes no sense at all logically. But anarcho-capitalists believe in total free market, free minds and free markets, and see the government as an entity as being the enemy of the common man. All it does is tax you, regulate you, beat you up, make you do things that make no sense or that you don't want to do. So that's it in a nutshell.
So what would be the difference between somebody who believes in the ultimately small government versus somebody who would be on the far right?
Well, this distinction of right and left, it's a floating abstraction. I mean, generally speaking, you can't define right or left in solid, concrete terms because they always move. Remember, it used to be that the far left wanted socialism, but hey, free speech. Well, the far left today still wants socialism, but they don't want free speech. So that part's changed. And the far right, or the right, has always been associated with nationalism, still is, but as being warfare. In other words, they give you the choice, typically, between the welfare state on the left and the warfare state on the right. But there's really no difference between either one of them. They're two sides of the same false coin, where you have to give over your personal rights to the people that are in government.
Yeah, I always think of far left and far right as the size of government, I suppose. I always think of, but I get what you're saying. A lot of it is these sort of themes and ideas that we ascribe to them that aren't really necessarily what they mean in the classical sense, right? So somebody who's on the far right, they might be, assumed to be a super pro-gun person. Somebody who's on the far left is assumed to be an anti-gun person, when in reality, those are just themes that we attach to them, as opposed to just the size of government spending.
Yeah, let's look at it this way, perhaps. Libertarians believe in individual rights and individualism. People on the conventional political spectrum, whether they're deemed right or left, are collectivists, they're statists. There are some distinctions. I mean, rightists generally tend to be pro-gun. They tend to be nationalistic. Yeah, okay. And the people on the left are more pro-welfare than the ones on the right. Yeah, okay. But these things flow and ebb, and it's irrelevant to me as a libertarian, as an anarcho-capitalist, what those people believe or don't believe. I can tell you that Millet believes pretty much exactly what I believe. I'm not talking about his personal opinions. Everybody's got personal opinions. I'm talking about philosophically. We're very much on the same page.
I think we're heading to the same place here, because I believe that a lot of the problems that exist around us today are the direct result of government incompetence, overspending, overtaxing, and creating what people like Justin Trudeau, who's in power right now, will say, I've implemented all these programs to help with affordable housing. And then it's like every time he introduces a new affordable housing program, he seems to only make things worse. that seems to be exactly the case here. And there was an article on the CBC today saying how baby formula is now too expensive for many families. And I can't tell you, I'm 40 years old. I have a lot of friends who are a little bit younger than me, but around my age, who say we can only afford to have one kid. I can't afford to have kids. And what we're witnessing now is this hollowing out of the middle class. I believe that has everything to do with a lack of free markets and in government overreach, along with crony capitalism. We got big corporations who get in there and they force things to go in their direction, which effectively in the end just takes from the middle class. That's effectively your line of thinking?
Yes, except I would put that on steroids, because you said too much regulation, too high taxes. Look, I don't believe in regulation at all. There's nothing that the government can do that the free market can do. In fact, all the government does is order people in the free market around. You create roads, you do this. I mean, it's like, look, it's gotten so bad in the West that the Soviets used to say before the collapse of that empire, well, if the government didn't create our Ladas and Moscoviches, who'd make the cars? It's like a gotcha. If the government didn't make cars, who would? Well, it's pretty much like that with every service the government provides.
So under your ideas with anarcho-capitalism, there would still be laws, right? Like we wouldn't just be allowed to just go around and shoot people.
No, because we believe in property rights, and your primary piece of property is your own body. Therefore, if your primary piece of property is your own body, you should get to do what you want with your own body. You can take drugs, you can do what you want. It's your business. But of course, there are laws. Look, put it this way. In a libertarian society, you wouldn't need a law library full of laws and regulations, hundreds and thousands of them, where, they say ignorance of the law is no excuse. That's completely nonsensical, because there are millions of laws and regulations. So, of course, ignorance of the law is an excuse. I'll say this, there should be just two laws. Two. Anybody can remember two laws. One, do all you say you're going to do. And two, don't aggress against other people or their property. Now, anybody can remember those. In fact, they're intuitive, even for a baby. Don't steal other people's stuff and don't hurt them. That's all you need for laws.
So one idea that, and I've never actually had this discussion with anybody before about anarcho-capitalism, but one idea that comes to mind when I hear of this is maybe you'd want to live in a place where there's great paramedics, there's strong police forces that everybody sort of believes in. One example of that might be the Reedy Creek district in Florida, right? Where you've got the one area of Florida that is managed better than anywhere in terms of paramedics and security is Reedy Creek in Florida, where Disney effectively has their own district that they have full control over in the state of Florida. Is that sort of how you would see stuff under anarcho-capitalism, that you'd almost sort of have private police or private security and private paramedics?
Yes, everything would be privatized. When things are private, a corporation I'm not talking about one that's hooked up with the state and can provide anything because it's granted a monopoly of some type or is subsidized in some way. None of that would exist. No monopolies, no subsidies. Look, if you have worked and you've saved money and you have assets, you're going to live in a nice area and if you don't, well, that's tough. The answer to that is to work harder so you can elevate yourself and buy the services that you need. I mean, if you don't buy the services voluntarily from people that provide them voluntarily, what are you going to do? Make slaves of other people that they have to provide police and ambulance for you when you don't pay for it? I mean, that's not the real world. I mean, People say, I want free medical care. Great. At whose expense? At whose expense? I mean, ultimately, are you going to hold a gun to the doctor's head and say, you must supply medical services for nothing or we'll hurt you? I mean, look, everything should be a voluntary transaction between two people. And if you get the state out of these things, it basically would be. For all except for criminal personalities. And they exist. They exist. But they can be handled.
So, Doug, I got to ask you, I always view you as a gold guy. We recently saw an exciting Sunday night, I guess we could say, with the price of gold. It's been generally a pretty good year. What's your assessment of what's happening right now in the gold market?
Well, compared to everything else in the world, a suit of clothes, a meal, a house, it seems to me, and has for several years, that the price of gold is reasonable. Reasonable. But that said, I think it can go a lot higher. Ultimately, in a free market system, you wouldn't have national currencies. You certainly wouldn't have central banks. You would use gold. And in fact, before 1933 in the US, the national currency was just the dollar, it was just a receipt for a certain amount of gold. You take your $20 bill down to a bank and they would give you an ounce of gold. It was a receipt. Currency was just a receipt for something. But now the dollar is simply an I owe you nothing. In other words, the issuer of it won't give you anything for it. You can go down to the grocery store, the Chevy dealer, and see what he'll give you for it, but there's no fixed amount. This is a disaster for an advanced industrialized society to have a currency which is unreliable and is really not worth saving. And I speak as somebody who's just arrived in Buenos Aires. This is the largest piece of currency we have here in Argentina. It's 1,000 peso note. It's worth about $1. And the way that inflation punishes the average guy is the average guy, what does he save? He saves the national currency. But when the currency is turned into toilet paper by the central bank, the average guy can't get ahead. He saves in pesos, but the peso becomes worthless. So the central banks and inflation are really the enemy of the lower and middle classes. The upper classes do just fine. They know how to play with real estate and securities and businesses and so forth.
So when we look around what's sort of been happening economically, whether we're talking about in the US or in places like Argentina, but I guess specifically we can talk about maybe the US and Canada, where most of our audience is. What's the outcome that you see happening here? Do you see we're just going to continue to hollow out the middle class, the rich is going to get richer, the labor class is going to continue to struggle under this economic paradigm, and it's just going to just continually get worse for the next 30 years? Or do you think that there's a big economic event that's going to happen over, say, the next few years that's really going to shake things up?
I'd say a big economic event has been inevitable for many years. But each time, the authorities have forestalled this big economic event by printing more money. It's very much like if the government were to put $100,000 in every person's bank account this Sunday night in Canada. Everybody gets $100,000. That'd be fantastic. It would stimulate the economy, just as they said. But after everybody goes out and buys their new Ferrari and maybe buys a $1 million house and incurs debt, there's no more real wealth that's been created. As a matter of fact, real wealth is being consumed, because a lot of people are going to say, hey, I'm wealthy. I don't have to work for the next year. So less wealth is being produced. Meanwhile, thinking that you're rich because you got this money from out of nowhere, you start consuming more and living higher off the hog. And this is a path to becoming poorer, not richer. So, and of course, the value of the currency, when it can be created like toilet paper, it loses value. People don't save. If people, look, the key to prosperity is producing more than you consume and saving the difference. That's basically how you become wealthy. But if the currency that you save in is worthless, why produce more than I consume? Why be future oriented?
That's
This
an
has a
interesting way
little,
of looking at it.
yeah, this has a little bit to do with the fact that people have become so desperate now. They're indebted. They, it wasn't so long ago that Americans and Canadians used to buy their cars for cash. You save up money, you buy a car. Very simple. Then there was 2-year financing, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year, 7-year. And now a lot of people don't even own the cars. They go from being a small asset to an immediate liability when you lease the car. And the same thing is true of houses. Believe it or not, nobody believes this. People actually used to save for their houses. Save the money for the house, build the house, there you are. But now you cannot buy or you cannot sell real estate without a mortgage. And this is true throughout the economy. So if things slow down a little bit, and I think they're going to slow down a lot, I've popularized the phrase to some degree, the Greater Depression, because the unpleasantness of 1929 to 1946, I think what we're looking at in the coming years is going to be a depression much worse and much longer lasting and much different from what happened from 29 to 46. It's an inevitable consequence of inflation, taxation, and regulation. So hold on to your hat.
It feels like it's close, doesn't it?
It does. And we can define a depression too. I'd like to define that word. A depression, the best broad general definition, is a period of time during which most people's standard of living drops significantly. Now, you can have a depression if a hurricane hits the town and knocks over all the houses and destroys all the businesses. Yes, that's a little local depression. But much worse than that is a government-caused depression, an artificially caused, if you would, depression. Those can take a long time to recover from. Like take the Soviet Union. From 1917 to 1990, they were in almost a perpetual depression. We can do that here in the US or Canada too. Same type of thing the Soviets did, or even worse, what the Chinese did before Deng Xiaoping changed things in 1980. It was horrible. Government is the enemy of the common man. And government can be the friend, it generally is, of rich people at the top of society, where they trade money for favors with the high government officials. It's the way it's done.
It's funny because living here in Canada, and I'm sure you know plenty of Canadians, we generally like to think of ourselves as being very polite and kind and friendly, but there's just so many Canadians that I know that they like to scoff and point at other countries and laugh. But everything you've said to me is like that is a large part of the problem with what we have in this country. Is it's just there's a handful of oligopolies that control all of our industries, and they just keep consolidating and consolidating. We're gonna get to the point where there's going to be like 2 grocery store chains, and there's 2 communications companies, and it's to the point where I don't know. You look up the top 20 companies by market cap in Canada. 17 of them are either banking, insurance, or companies who pull stuff out of the ground. They don't process anything, but they pull it out of the ground. There's literally no industry here. And anybody who does actually have any talent, they seem to be picking up the phone and finding a way to go work somewhere else where they actually do foster industry and innovation. And I feel like Canada is just such a prime example of everything you're speaking about in terms of how government overreach and crony capitalism leads you to this sort of dark place.
It does. The government as an entity takes away personal responsibility from people. Don't worry about your medical costs, or for that matter, your personal health, which is your business, not the government's, because we'll pay for any medical things to go wrong. And don't worry about losing your job. We have welfare to support you. And so it tends to destroy society itself, these kind of attitudes. I think that, Trudeau, almost every leader in the world today is practically a criminal personality, but Trudeau is certainly one of the worst. Well, is he worse than the Bidenistas? The Bidenistas are much more dangerous, of course, because the U.S. is much, much more powerful than, I should turn off my Skype. Because the U.S. government is so powerful, it's very, very dangerous. And the people in control in Washington are, they're very much the same kind of people that the Jacobins were when they overthrew Louis the 16th in France in 1789. Same personality types, exactly. They're very dangerous.
So in terms of our audience is largely a retail investing audience, how are you positioning yourselves these days? Is there an asset class that you think is positioned to do well in 2024?
Yeah. It's harder now to say what you should do than it might have been in years in the past, because the stock market, at least in nominal terms, is close to an all-time high. The bond market was at an all-time high after having gone up for 40 years. Well, the stock market's gone up for the last 40 years, up until, say, 2022, when both stocks and bonds really peaked. So I wouldn't touch bonds with a 10-foot pole at this point. They're a triple threat to your capital. You have the inflation risk in the currency. You have the interest rate risk. And I'm not talking about what interest rates are going to do next week or next month, but I expect they're going to go back to at least the levels that we saw in the early 1980s, which may seem like ancient history, but you'll recall even the US government was paying 17, 18% for its money back then. They're going to go back to that level for a number of reasons. And last is the default risk. Of course, the government will never default. They can just print up money to pay the bonds off. But corporations can default. So forget about bonds. Generally speaking, I'd forget about stocks. If we have a depression, and which we will, and people consume less, earnings will go down, but the debt on the corporation's books will still be there. What should you do? Well, I like to buy things that are cheap, and raw materials, commodities are the cheapest area of the economy right now. So I think that's a very good place to be, and especially the stocks of the companies that mine raw materials. They're really close to all-time lows, no matter how you cut it. Price to book value, price to earnings ratio, dividend yields. So I'm very heavy in resource stocks. And of course, you're in Canada. People are much more familiar with resource stocks generally than they are in the US. But, well, I'm sure you're aware you've got a lot of smaller Canadian oil companies, gas companies, mostly in Alberta, that are paying anywhere from 6 to 10% or so in current dividends. And I think both oil and gas are going up. So the prices of those stocks and their dividends, I suspect, are going to go up a lot higher. Well, same is true for all the commodities across the board. Gold stocks are especially cheap right now, especially cheap. So there's speculation, though. I mean, gold mining, in fact, mining is a crappy business. But there are times when you get into it, it offers 10-to-1 returns. Now's one of those, I think.
I've wanted to ask you this before, but what's your top win? You've been investing for years. I'm talking open market purchase, a stock that you bought that that just not only did well but maintained it. What's over the course of your career? What's the one you look at and you're sort of the most proud of, or you kind of view as the most successful stock pick that you've had?
Well, resource stocks generally are burning matches, so that they're typically not heirlooms. Well, some of them, I mean, like I was a founding shareholder, close to it, for Altius, which is traded out of Newfoundland. That's a company that's going to survive. I was a founding shareholder in Wheaton, which is basically a royalty company. So there are a few like that you can hold for the long term, and there are others. I mean, I was an early player in royalty companies. A lot of advantages, especially in the mining world with royalty companies. So people should look at that. I mean, my best hit. What was my best hit? Well, Diamond Fields was one of them, and I don't know if people even remember that company, but they were looking for offshore diamonds, offshore of Namibia, and it was a good story as to why diamonds mined in South Africa would be higher quality and larger quantity if you went offshore in the ocean looking for them. That didn't work out, but through an accident, they found the Voisey's Bay nickel deposit, and that stock went from, I mean, I bought a private placement in it at $0.25 with the full warrant. And where did it peak? $150 or something like that. So how much was that? Let's see, 150. It was about 1,000-to-1 return in the like 3 or 4 years, something like that. But it wasn't an investment; it was a speculation. I got lucky.
You've named some pretty big wins here. Wheaton, now a $65 stock in Canada. Voisey's Bay is obviously one of the most epic stories in Canadian mining history. It feels like we're not seeing many of those wins these days.
Oh, you're right. I mean, the market is dead as a doornail, even with gold now above 2,000. These little exploration and smaller development stocks, basically, they're still dead. The big companies like Newmont and Rio Tinto, yes, they've started to move. So I think it will go down the pyramid. And I generally don't put money anymore in exploration stocks. Yeah, you can pick a lottery ticket and get really lucky, but mostly they're burning matches. That said, if you want to play in this arena, now is an excellent time. These companies are really, really cheap.
Yeah, I've never seen a time where I've seen so many companies that are trading under a $3 million market cap. There's a bunch of publicly traded companies in Canada right now. I'm not kidding, have market caps under $1 million, which I don't remember there ever being a time like this. I suppose that the challenge with those is that they run out of cash and they don't have bookkeepers that are willing to work for shares, and they can't pay the exchange.
They don't have an electric company that's willing to float the monthly electric bill for shares either, right? Oh, lots of problems with it. But if you go through the I don't know how many resource companies are traded in Canada right now, at least 1,000, I guess. Might be more.
Yeah, I'll pull that up for you. We did a study on this recently. I thought that the number was more like north of 2,000.
I think you're probably right. It probably is north of 2,000. So it's Pareto's law, which is to say that 80% of everything is total crap. And of the remaining 20%, 80% of that is marginal. But 20% of that 20% is very interesting. And let's say we have 2,000 companies in Canada. So maybe you got 20, 30, 40, 50 that are excellent speculations that aren't going to dry up and blow away in the next few years.
We've got 3,500 companies currently listed on the TSX and TSX Venture. And of those, does it give me the number here that's mining? Let me pull that up here. It looks like the number is, looks like you're actually more accurate. This is not including oil and gas, about 1,100 and about 134 oil and gas companies. So around 1,200. That's just the TSX and TSX. Plus we got the CSE where there's probably like 400 or 500.
Yes, of course. Well, the problem is sorting through those companies, which are the real deal and which ones are promoted. I don't write a newsletter anymore, frankly, but I still do a free blog just because I like to be able to say things from time to time. It's called theinternationalman.com. And on that blog, people that go there can look for what I call the 9 Ps, that when you're looking, especially at a resource stock, but any kind of a company, the things that you ought to look at to sort out these 1,000 or 1,500 companies. It's very helpful if you know a little bit about geology, a little bit about mining engineering, a little bit about a lot of things. But the 9 Ps, people, that's number one most important thing. It's the people that are running the company that count more than everything else put together. So that's number one. Number two is the property. What does the company have as an asset or hope for asset for whichever mineral they're going for? Financing, spelled with a PH. Most of these companies don't have any money. Can they raise it? Well, if they have good people and or good property, they can. Look at politics. I mean, the same deposit in the US or Canada is worth a lot more money than if it was worth in the Congo, for instance. So there's a lot of things to look at and balance before you buy the stock. And of course, the tenor of the market is important too. I think the tenor of the market's going to change. I think gold is going to go higher, as will copper and silver and uranium, which I'm very bullish on for lots of reasons. And these stocks, which nobody wants or to even hear about right now. I mean, when I talk to serious fund managers, they kind of smirk and laugh when I say I'm involved in these things, but that's fine. It means they don't own any of these stocks, and that'll change cyclically. And all they can do is buy. They don't own any of them, so they can't sell them. I think they're at the bottom, assuming that the individual company survives, of course.
Well, I hope so, as somebody who's heavily invested in the junior mining space, and coming off of what felt like a pretty rough year. I've talked to a lot of people like yourself that have been doing this for decades, and many of them have told me that 2023 has felt like the worst year that they've ever been involved in junior mining or the junior space in Canada, that they've never seen liquidity dry up this much, and it just feels like there won't be an industry. And there will obviously be your mid tiers in your larger companies, but in terms of those exploration and early stage companies that are trying to do stuff, the industry is going to contract massively if we're playing in such a small pool of capital in another year.
Well, there are always winners that come up. Like I'm trying to think of.
Well, there's Great Bear.
Hmm?
Great Great Bear is the first one that always comes to mind for me when I think of the recent wins. That was the
Yes.
red light gold play.
Yes. Another one that financed at around 30 cents is now trading at, I don't know, what is it, $4 or $5 is Artemis. And another one is Bravo, which is in Brazil. Some of these things have already done 10 or 20 to 1 shots, even in this crappy market, because the results of the individual company overcame the terrible market. But at some point, I hope that these junior mining stocks look like internet stocks did back in 2000, when absolutely anything that claimed to have anything to do with the internet would do 10 to 1 or 100 to 1, and some did 1,000 to 1, because it was a crazy bull market. I think that could happen. Well, I've got my fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, Doug, thanks so much for hopping on here. We're really grateful for you taking some time out of your day to do this with us. Our audience loves having you on here. You are easily our biggest ticket guest we have on here in terms of views. I don't know if you're aware of that, but you definitely are. So we're super grateful that you take the time out of your day to come and chat with us. We always learn new things when you come on here, and I hope you keep coming on here. And I wish you happy holidays and a happy new year.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that, and I'm very gratified to hear what you said. So talk to you soon.
Thanks, Doug. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let us know what you think in the comment section. All right. Thanks, everyone.